Okay. Hello, everyone. It's Dr. Marissa here with Movement RX. And today, what we are talking about is optimizing sleep for focus energy or for energy and productivity. So, little bit of background. I am a physical therapist and have a cognitive science degree as well, especially in sleep science. So, what we're talking about is a couple of things. We're going to talk a little bit about how sleep impacts our focus and our clarity and our ability to be productive and get things done, whether that's in a work context or whether it's in a home context. And then we'll also share some top tips for optimizing your sleep. So let's get started here. How do we want to feel when we're at work? We want to feel like we're focused. We want to feel like we have attention, like we have an attention span that's longer than a few seconds. We want our tasks to feel easy. We want to feel creative. We want to feel like we're able to solve problems. And there's actually many different pathways or lifestyle levers that you can tweak to get those things, right? We can tweak our mindset. Sometimes that has an impact on our attention and our focus and our creativity. We can tweak our nutrition. We can tweak our ability to be mindful and present. So practicing mindfulness. We can play around with our hydration. But the one that we're talking about today is sleep. And that's because sleep, I think, is one of the easiest ways that we can level up our ability to do the things that we need to do. And really, the only thing we have to do is schedule the downtime for ourselves, right? And in practice, this is actually pretty hard. It doesn't, like in theory, it's really easy. Like, I just should sleep more or sleep better. But the reality is that it doesn't come easy for a lot of people. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. And by a lot of people, I mean that at least 1/3 of Americans are regularly getting less than 7 hours of sleep. And some of this is, I think, caffeine related. Some of this is stress related. Some of this is just related to not prioritizing sleep enough, maybe because people are unfamiliar with the impacts. But we're going to talk a little bit about sleep and focus, sleep and effort, sleep and problem solving, and go over kind of the top tips for getting a really good night of sleep. So I've got the chat up here. So if you guys have any questions, you're welcome to pop them in the chat and I'll be able to answer them. So I want to talk about sleep and focus first, or sleep and clarity. And the thing that I want to start with is that sleep is kind of like a battery recharge for our brains. And so when we don't get enough, our brains are kind of running on power saving mode. And think about what happens to your cell phone maybe when it's in power saving mode, right? The screen is dimmer. The apps are running more slowly. And I'm not totally sure what the other things are that happen in low power mode, but it's not performing in the same way that it would if it had full battery. And the same thing kind of happens with your brain. And that's because that when your brain is running on low power mode, or when you haven't had enough sleep, or your sleep quality wasn't high enough, the brain kind of finds ways to get that sleep in during the day, or get that little period of restoration in during the day. And it does this in what's called a little micro sleep. And so a micro sleep are these little lapses in our attention. So where a part of our brain that has been working too hard maybe and hasn't had enough time to recover, it kind of turns off and it sleeps for a small moment. And this can happen if we're in, it becomes hard to sustain our deeply on anything. And we don't necessarily notice it. We just kind of feel a little bit distracted, or we feel like we're not able to focus. But it's really because our brain's trying to get those little bits of sleep in by sleeping a piece of part of the brain. So that's kind of how it impacts our focus, right? We're not able to focus when we're not getting enough sleep or enough high quality sleep. The second way that sleep can kind of show up in our ability to do our day-to-day work is through how it's impacting our perceived effort, or like how hard it makes things feel. And sleep literally changes the way that we perceive effort, which is really crazy. And they found this in exercise, and they found this in cognitive tasks as well, or work-related tasks or tasks. And so kind of how this might show up is that where normally a work task or a life task, let's say maybe responding to an email or doing one of your regular tasks at work. Let's say it normally feels like a 3 out of 10 effort when on a good day. If you have a poor night of sleep the night before, that task that normally feels like a 3 out of 10 might feel like a 5 or a 10 or a 6 out of 10 in effort, right? It takes more cognitive energy to do that task, which is wild. And that same thing happens with exercise too, where if we haven't gotten enough sleep, maybe a 2-mile walk is going to feel a lot harder than it would when we've had a full night of sleep, which is really cool. So sleep is changing our ability to focus, and it's changing the effort level that we are feeling like we have to exert to get something done. And then the last way that sleep is going to impact our productivity specifically, again, productivity related to either work tasks or even life tasks, right? Getting our life stuff, our life admin done. But sleep and problem solving, right? There's a link there. And that's because when you're sleeping, your brain is really, really active, and it's making all of these connections between old pieces of information and new pieces of information, and kind of weaving that all together to create your understanding of the world and how things are working, and your work tasks and your life tasks and all of that. When we're not getting enough sleep, that problem solving ability goes down. And I have a really interesting story to share about how sleep has impacted my own ability to solve a problem. And this was back in maybe 2019, and I was living abroad at the time in Italy. And while I was there, I had to learn how to drive stick or drive a manual vehicle, because that's the car that we had at the time. And I was having such a hard time learning how to drive stick. And it was like super clunky. And I'm sure this happens to everyone, right? It was super clunky, and the car would stall, and it was so stressful because I couldn't coordinate my hands with my feet and the whole thing. So what happened is one night while I was sleeping, I had this dream that I was driving stick smoothly. And when I woke up in the morning, it's like my body knew how to drive stick now. Like it had somehow figured it out and linked all of the processes together, all of the hand and the foot coordination together. And when I woke up, I literally knew I could drive stick, and then I got in the car and I just drove it no problem to the gym. So it was a really, really cool thing for me to experience, just having that insight almost, but it was kind of more body related insight, just show up during sleep. So sleep impacts our focus. It impacts our perceived effort, or like how hard things are feeling, and our ability to solve problems. So now I want to move on to a couple of the biggest tips for getting a really good night of sleep, right? So obviously the first thing is that we just have to prioritize the time that we have available for sleep. That's kind of step one, right? And once that one's already off the table, some of these other things will help with the quality of your sleep. And even if you're not able to dedicate the full 7 to 9 hours for sleep, what you can do is still implement these changes. So hopefully your depth of sleep is better, and so you're a little bit more restored during the day. But the very first one I have is related to the environment that you're sleeping in, right? We want a cool sleeping environment. Our bodies sleep much more deeply when we're sleeping between 65 and 68 degrees. We want it to be dark in our sleep environment, so there's no light coming into our eyes, right? Not light from a TV, not light from a screen, not light from an alarm clock that's right in front of our eyes. Because what that light's doing is it's suppressing the melatonin production in your brain. And we definitely want to avoid those lights before before sleep, right? Because that's when your melatonin is released. That starts to kind of start the process of sleep. But we also want to avoid those lights while we're asleep, because it's just, the brain can still process light that's coming in even through closed eyelids, right? So we want to get rid of light as much as possible in the bedroom while we're sleeping. And then we also want it to be quiet. And this is kind of the same reason that we don't want light coming into our eyes. And that's because the brain is still processing. It's still doing a lot of things while we're asleep, right? It's listening for sounds. And so if a car drives by in the middle of the night, your brain is going to still register that, and it's going to process that. And it's more likely to wake you up if it's really quiet and then a car drives by. So what we generally recommend is that you try adding a white noise machine or a fan or anything that's going to make some noise to drown out anything that could potentially make it into your ears and wake you up in the middle of the night. Okay. And the next piece, or the next kind of top sleep tip that I have for you guys, is that we want to use what we're consuming during the day to be supportive of sleep versus detrimental to sleep. And the big ones that are going to get in the way of your sleep quality are caffeine, alcohol, and nicotine. So caffeine and nicotine specifically are stimulants, right? And so what they do is they kind of go into our brain and they release specific neurotransmitters that are keeping us alert and keeping us awake, which is kind of why we use them, right? That's why we use caffeine. It's to be alert and to be awake. However, that caffeine just unfortunately stays in your system and stays in your brain for a really, really long time. As long as 12 to 24 hours, there's still some caffeine being kind of floating around in the system, possibly binding those receptors in your brain. And so taking some time to pay attention to when you're consuming your stimulants and maybe how long those stimulants stay in your body for, that might make a big difference in your sleep at night. So generally with caffeine, we want to cut that off before noon for sure, but possibly even earlier than that, because there's different sensitivities to caffeine. Some people process it really quickly. Some people process it really slowly. But what that'll do is that if you have the caffeine in your system, that caffeine is kind of making your sleep a little bit lighter, and it's kind of interrupting your sleep cycles, or maybe it's more likely that a noise will wake you up if there's some caffeine in your system, so the brain's not really as quiet as it could be. But yeah, if you keep that caffeine either really early in the day, or we slowly wean down our dose entirely, your sleep will probably feel a lot better. Same thing with nicotine, right? Because it's a stimulant. We don't want that floating around in the brain as much as possible by the time that we're trying to fall asleep. And then the last one for nutrition is alcohol. And alcohol is a sedative, right? It kind of dampens things going on in the brain, which is why it makes us fall asleep a little bit faster. However, that sleep that we are getting when there's alcohol in our system isn't as high quality, especially later in the night, right? If there's some alcohol still in the system, that impacts our dreaming sleep or our REM sleep when we're doing all of our emotional processing. So we don't want alcohol before bed. We want to, if we are consuming alcohol, we do want it to be actually further away from bed, right? As far away from bed as possible. Not necessarily in the morning, but at least it'd be gone by the time you tried to fall asleep. But keeping alcohol away from bedtime and as little as possible. So we've got how to set up the environment. We've got how to optimize sleep through nutrition or what we're consuming. And then lastly, I want to talk about quieting the mind as a skill. So a lot of my patients in the clinic that I'm seeing for physical therapy are also having sleep problems. So we always talk about sleep as part of this. But I feel that many of my patients and probably many people that are struggling with sleep are having trouble quieting their mind. And this is something that's come up a lot more, probably since the pandemic would be my guess. But the mind needs to be able to kind of rest and be quiet in order to have a good night of sleep and to kind of stay asleep for the whole night. And where this can be a big problem is that if our minds all day are really hyper vigilant and we are kind of always looking for the next problem and we're stressed out all day, we're almost teaching our brain to be really stressed out all the time and to try to stay alert for any threats that are coming, whether it's a threat from work, whether it's a threat from the environment, a threat to our family, anything. And that pattern carries over into the night where we're sleeping and your brain is still almost hyper vigilant or still trying to pay attention to any threat. So it's more likely that a noise is going to wake you up, or that you're not going to be able to stay down in deep sleep because maybe your partner rolls over in bed or you hear the dog shake or something like that. So practicing quieting your mind during the day can really improve how you're able to sleep at night and how quickly you're able to get back to sleep if you wake up at night. I've had so many people that have said to me that they'll fall asleep, no problem, because they're sleepy, and then they'll wake up and their brain just starts going and they start thinking about the day ahead, and their heart rate starts to come up, and that's just not a conducive state to be in for falling back to sleep, right? Because then we're super stimulated and we can't wind back down. And those wind down skills have to come from practice, right? Practice during the day. And so there's lots of different ways that you can do that. That could be something like a non-sleep deep rest would be something that you can kind of type in to do a non-sleep deep rest practice. There's practices called I rest. I is a little, as the letter I, rest. That's a yoga nidra practice, but without the spiritual component. It's just more of a mind-body relaxation practice. There's meditation. There's progressive muscle relaxation. There are breathing exercises, anything that can kind of train your body to access the state of calm that you need to be in to have really deep and restorative sleep. So let's recap that whole thing. We talked about how sleep impacts our ability to focus and be productive in a work setting or in a home setting, right? Productivity is just our ability to get our stuff done. We talked about how sleep impacts focus, perceived effort, and problem solving, those three specific things. And then we gave 3 tips for improving sleep. One of them was about setting up our bedroom environment. One of them was about making sure that physiologically the things that are in our system are promoting sleep versus interfering with sleep. And then we talked about using practicing having a quiet mind in order to have better ease falling asleep and staying asleep, right? If we've practiced the skill of having a quiet mind during the day, that way we can transfer that to the evening hours. Okay. So that's a lot, but I'm hoping you've at least taken away something that you can use to support your own sleep. And if any of this resonates with you, or if this is information that you want to bring to your organization or teams, you can use the link in the chat. I'll pop it right here there we go. Perfect. To schedule a call with Dr. T about kind of the sleep content that we can deliver to organizations, but also nutrition, also mindset, and movement-based trainings as well. Okay, everyone. Thanks for popping in. I'll be monitoring the chat for comments, and I'll respond to those as they come in. All right. Happy Friday.